We're going to do this starting off like we're reading the Jerusalem Post. We'll start off with Father Pfleger, and then we'll go Bell, Burns, and Fountain. So let me introduce our panelists. Father Pfleger is someone who needs no introduction, so I'm not giving him one.
Thanks, Paul.
But those of us who go back a long way with Saint Sabina, it was a very important parish going way back, and it still is. So let's give him a hand. Michael Pfleger. With a hand like that, Father, I don't know if I want to talk. Okay. We have with us Dr. Carl Bell, psychiatrist, Jackson Park Hospital. Give him a hand. Dr. Bell has published many articles and books on mental health and authored The Sanity of Survival. And he is someone who is very well respected in his field. And also he's a member of the Executive Committee of the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention. How about a hand for Dr. Bell?
Thank you.
As you can tell, we have enough here that we could take the whole time with the introductions. Next, we have the fighting alderman of the 4th Ward, Will Burns. As I told Will that he's probably really happy he's an alderman and no longer a state rep. Just a little humor for you politically active people. If you don't, Jackie Robinson Ivy will afterwards will explain that. That's one. Okay. Will has got a long resume, but most important, he was elected in February 2011 to the 4th Ward after 2 terms in the Illinois General Assembly, and he is deeply involved in the ward that I used to live in many decades ago. And the 4th Ward, of course, has always been the great rival with the 5th Ward, but now that Will's the alderman, I'm sure the 4th Ward is going to supersede the 5th Ward for sure. How about a big round of applause for Will Burns? Last and certainly not least, my colleague from Roosevelt University, John Fountain, is also a columnist for the Chicago Sun-Times, wins all kinds of awards, and I'm not envious. He is... No, that's 2. You're right, Jackie. That's it. All right. And you all read him in the paper. He teaches at Roosevelt. Big round of applause for John Fountain. All right. I had 2, my 2, right? Okay. Father Pfleger is going to start, and those of you who have ever been to St. Sabina for one of his sermons, we're putting him on 5 minutes.
You have 3 closings?
Father,
that's for the first part.
I understand. This is not easy. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. This morning in the Sun-Times, Alderman Burns, you said you have tremendous respect for me. But I need you to know that I feel very disrespected. And I feel insulted. Insulted by what I read in the paper this morning and what I've heard. First, let me say this. The violence issue for me is very personal and it's very real. It's also real for parents. I'm going to just ask you one quick second. Those parents who've lost loved ones who are here today, would you stand up? We need to give them a hand because they fight every day. Last night, one person was killed, 3 people were shot. July 4th weekend in Chicago, 10 people were killed, 55 were shot. Since January 1st, and this year, 205 people have been killed. 1,171 people have been shot. Is that Spike Lee's fault? Is that Chiraq's fault? The movie hasn't even come out yet. We are national media across this country. I get calls from all over, MSNBC, CNN, talking about Chicago's violence. and we're mad about a movie and a movie title. Where was the resolutions to deal with violence in the city of Chicago? Where's the resolutions? Where are the city council calling an emergency meeting to talk about what's going on in Chicago that the world is talking about? Also, Alderman, and I have great respect for you, but I'm known to say what I think.
Yep.
You made a comment this morning about passing out hot dogs and temporary jobs is what Spike Lee did. First of all, they may have been temporary jobs, but tell me where those 3,000 people that worked in this movie in the last 6 weeks would have gotten a job. And tell me about the 20 interns that got a job and the 4,000 people that sat in line in Chicago in order to get a part in this movie. But saying that Spike Lee passing out hot dogs and hiring temporary jobs, to me, trivializes a man like Spike Lee, his life, his body of work, Do the Right Thing, Malcolm X, Four Little Girls, When the Levees Broke, Jungle Fever, Crooklyn, and millions of other dollars that have been spent in order to bring consciousness to America and Brez to cause us to think in America. And the millions of dollars were brought into this city over the last 6 weeks in this city to help this city and bring in an income. It trivializes a man that I get very angry about because I happen to have great respect for what Spike Lee has meant in the field of movies, all his history in this country, and willing to take on. And he's willing to take on the issue that nobody has had the courage to take on. Black on black crime, which has got to be dealt with in America, and Spike Lee had the guts to take it on. But when you trivialize what this movie and what he's done, understand you are also trivializing Angela Bassett, Samuel Jackson, Nick Cannon, Wesley Snipes, John Cusack, Jennifer Hudson, Harry Lennox, and countless other actors and actresses who are committed to this movie and in this movie because they want to save black lives just like Spike Lee does. And the hundreds and hundreds of Chicagoans who every place I've been with Spike around this city say, thank you for doing what you're doing. It also trivializes those people who lost lives. It trivializes me because I believe wholeheartedly in this movie, and I spent my life trying to fight violence and injustice in this city. You said in the paper this morning that this is going to hurt, possibly, an economic renaissance that's happening on the South Side. What the hell South Side do you live on, Auburn? Because I lived in Auburn Gresham for 40 years. And we begged businesses to come in. I don't know where that economic renaissance is, and I'm not saying it's not happening in the 4th Ward, but it's not happening in the 17th Ward, it's not happening in the 16th Ward, it's not happening in Lawndale. The economic renaissance on the South Side, I have a hard time finding where that is. The day Alderman Burns gave a resolution, offered a resolution in the city council to denounce this movie's title, is the same exact meeting that Governor Ronner stood and talked at that council meeting, and the city council gave him an applause. The same Governor Ronner that's cut millions of jobs and dollars out of the black and the brown community and poor people in the state of Illinois. Nobody made a resolution about how he's hurting the community. We make a resolution about a name of a movie. We've also been told that this is going to hurt tourism. Let me tell you this. In 40 years at St. Sabina, I've never seen a trolley of tourists coming through 79th Street and Racine. Alderman, you have a right to dislike the movie, like anybody in this room, anybody in Chicago. There's a lot of things I dislike. I dislike homelessness, poverty, racism, classism, and prejudice in this city. I don't like any of those.
Father, can we...
Okay, man, I'll just wind it up.
Yes.
But to choose to try to hurt a person sends a message to the film industry, perhaps. Don't come to Chicago. Because we don't like what you're doing, we'll hurt your tax dollars. You send a message long on. Let me just, this last sentence. Violence is up in Chicago, homicides and shootings. CPS is under a federal investigation, and our state is in a shutdown. What the hell are we doing talking about a movie title?
If it's okay with the panel and the audience, given Father Pfleger's remarks, I think it's only fair that we have Mr. Burns, Alderman Burns, respond, and then we'll go to you other fellows. Not that we don't think you're important, but go ahead, Will, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. That's fun to come after a fiery speech like that. Good times. Paul mentioned earlier that I should be happy that I'm no longer in the State House of Representatives and I'm here as an alderman in the city of Chicago. And let me tell you that there is no harder job in Illinois or Chicago politics, or perhaps even in American politics outside of maybe being president or a governor or something like that, than being alderman of a ward in the city of Chicago. I see two of my colleagues are here. I want to acknowledge them. Jason and Derek, would you want to just wave? And is there one more over here? Okay, I'm sorry, Alderman Joe Moore. Thank you all for being here. I'm not scared of anyone or anything. And that's why people elected me to be the alderman of the 4th Ward, because they expect me to stand up for the things that are important to our community. All the things that Father Pfleger talked about having issues with, poverty, injustice, homelessness, I'm concerned about those issues too. And what I want to do is find long-term solutions to them. And what that means is that you create living wage jobs in those communities, and that you bring new housing, you bring the kind of economic development that helps to move people from poverty into opportunity. And that's the only reason why I'm doing this job. There are a lot of easier ways to make a living, but if you want to change how communities function and work, if you want to reduce unemployment, if you want to improve education, then you serve in the Chicago City Council, because you're held accountable and responsible for all of those things in your constituency. I don't need someone to lecture me about gun violence because I was carjacked when I was 17 years old. I was held up at gunpoint when I was a student at the University of Chicago, walking in supposedly safe Hyde Park. So I've seen a gun, I've been on the wrong side of it at least twice. So that's why I've been committed to reducing gun violence, for sponsoring bills that I knew weren't going to pass in the Illinois House of Representatives, because it was important to send a signal to the NRA that we need sensible gun control laws. That's why I marched with Father Pfleger for years and years and years. That's why I salute and commend every victim of gun violence here, because I understand what it's like to walk in your shoes. My father was a cop for 25 years. My mother was a social worker for 33 years. And I grew up in a family that said that you had to be committed to public service and you use your talents and abilities on behalf of your community. And let me just say this. For any of you who have not been involved in doing economic development deals on the south side of Chicago, it is very, very challenging. It is difficult to get private banks to want to lend capital to folks who want to do development deals on the south side of Chicago. It's very difficult to get equity investors to consider putting their capital in deals on the south side of Chicago or on the west side of Chicago. And it takes layer upon layer of financing to get even the most simple projects done. Projects that wouldn't take much to get done on the north side of Chicago. Take meeting after meeting after meeting with the Chicago Planning Development Department of Planning and Development, with the Illinois Housing Development Authority, CHA. You have all these different buckets because the market is still reticent about investing in these communities. Even when you have, in places like the 4th Ward, $1 billion in retail leakage, it's still very difficult to get the kind of retail that folks in those communities want and deserve. And so when you have the stigma of these communities, and let's be honest about it, a lot of that is driven by race, right? If we want to talk about racism, there's still redlining around these communities that needs to be addressed, and I want to join with Father Pfleger and anybody else who wants to fight with me in that battle to change that. But that's an underlying factor, and you layer onto it the pejorative assumptions of what it means to live and work and be in those communities. You're adding that much more of a barrier to economic development, to the very solutions that would reduce the violence and the pain and the suffering in the first instance. So that's why I oppose the name of the movie. Because I'm interested in long-term solutions, and I'm not interested in people who want to exploit our pain and our suffering for their own financial gain. And I don't believe that the public should have to invest in that. No, that's right. We don't have to, and we shouldn't. So that's my position, and I'm looking forward to having a robust conversation.
Okay, round of applause. Dr. Bell, you want to go? Now we'll back to the regular order. Dr. Bell, you're up.
Okay. I'm actually going to ask you to think with me for a minute because I think I've got the answer, but I'm a psychiatrist, so. But think about this for just a minute. Native American reservations, highest homicide rate, suicide rate, violence rate, highest rates supposedly of fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, because the only business that is thriving on most Native American reservations are liquor stores.
Right.
Drive through Lawndale, drive through any low-income black neighborhood.
That's right.
The only business that is thriving are liquor stores.
That's right.
I've heard about social determinants of health, and people are talking all this cutesy puke about food deserts, and that's important. I'm not trying to get hard on that. But they're missing the food swamps, the liquor stores. Now, since 1967, as a physician, I've been witnessing this phenomenon that when I was in medical school was called social cultural mental retardation. The prematurity rates in African Americans are 2 to 3 times higher than in European Americans. The intellectual disability, higher, 2 to 3 times. We're in America. No one's ever answered that question. So for the past 45 years, I have been seeing children who can't read, can't subtract 7 from 100, who have explosive tempers, who look like they have ADHD. They don't. Poor social emotional skills. Going to the detention center, you see nothing but those children. Bad judgment, doing stuff that doesn't make sense, explosive violence. It's fetal alcohol. It's fetal alcohol. My studies show 2/3 to 3/4 of the children in detention have fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. Special education, 2/3, 3/4. There was a study done in the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services, a guy named Chasnoff. It's in Pediatrics Journal. Sent this guy 547 children with serious behavioral disturbances. The children that perpetrate violence, the children that grow up to be adults to perpetrate violence, who can't work because they can't keep a job because they're subtly brain damaged. Of that 547, 28.5% were misdiagnosed, had never been diagnosed as having fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Think of it, just think, please. Half the pregnancies are unplanned. I'm not accusing African American women of being alcoholics. I know there will always be some room temperature IQ genius in the room that'll say, Bell's accusing black women of being, alcohol. No. Most of the women that I have seen in the study that I did that was published in May, 98% of them didn't know they were pregnant. Look at the Centers for Disease Control research. Half the pregnancies are unplanned. The women don't know they're pregnant for the first month or two. There is nothing wrong with social drinking, provided you're not pregnant. But if you are pregnant, you're going to give your unborn fetus brain damage. And they're going to be in the detention center, they're going to be in special ed, they're going to be abused, they're going to be physically and sexually abused, they're going to be unemployable, and they're not going to be able to do this. I've seen this for the past 45 years. And it's only been recently that I've been able to figure out what the hell I was seeing. It's fetal alcohol. Look it up. Don't take my word for it, because I know this sounds new, but look it up. The good news, the very good news, is that a simple over-the-counter nutrient, choline, 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 it's in egg yolk, it's in that thing that nobody likes, beef liver, corrects the subtle brain damage while the fetus is in utero and there's evidence that it corrects the brain damage after the child is born. That is a root cause solution. I know people are going to say lead, smoking. I've looked at all of that. Crack babies, no, that's a myth. It's fetal alcohol, and we have missed it. 4 out of 10 patients that come to me at Jackson Park, bad tempers, unemployed, didn't finish school, just walking train wrecks. 4 out of 10 have fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. It's a rate of 388 per 1,000. It's higher than is even in South Africa. We need to look at this, study it, and do something because it's fixable. This is the biggest public health problem in African Americans since slavery.
Doctor, can you summarize? Oh, you're done. Okay, good. Well said. Well, John, you're up. Bring us together. I know you can do it. You're a Roosevelt employee.
If you worry about a Catholic priest being brief, I should tell you that my grandfather and his father were Pentecostal preachers. But I think I'll manage. Chiraq, or Chi attack, Chi kill or Chimicide, Afghanistan or Chi Bosnia. What should we call this place where death too often tolls prematurely for the young, where our children here too often perish in the street by the gun? On the other side of the tracks, some call it Chiraq. From Inglewood to North Lawndale, where I grew up, from Garfield to Humboldt Park to Pilsen and Little Village to Roseland and the West Side's Austin, they know Chiraq. One part Chicago, one part Iraq. It is a name birthed in cold, dead facts. In Chiraq, bullets fly, children die, mothers cry. Too many lives marred by an invisible epitaph. Born in Chicago, murdered in Chiraq. And yet some here these days seem more worried about bad PR than the incessant flow of our gunshot-wounded sons and daughters to the hospital ER. More indignant about the unwanted name than our murderous shame. Shh, some say. Don't call our city by that name. It embodies too much hell, too much pain. Chiraq, it hurts. It is a name that bleeds, that stirs uncomfortable, disconcerting reflection, that sprang from the seed of death and destruction. I was born in Chicago, but I have walked the streets of Chiraq. It is not every neighborhood or every block. Chiraq exists beyond the Magnificent Mile, beyond the North Shore and the Gold Coast, beyond peaceful neighborhood meadows. Chiraq lies within the city's insignificant aisles, within the Cold Coast and hyper-segregated neighborhoods outside the perimeter of Chicago's glistening skyline beauty and tourist fare. Two worlds, a tale of two cities, one ugly, one pretty. In Chiraq, you hear the latest shots fired, then wait on edge for the victim's name, dreading all the while, knowing that no one's safe, that murder can quickly become anyone's fate. And yet here you also learn to live through fear, even as murder blows steady like the wind, even as the hearse wheels roll again and again and again.
Thank you, John. That was all I know off the top of your head, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Well prepared. Very well said, sir. All right, well, since I make up the rules, we had some pretty lively conversation. I think we should give each of the panelists 2 minutes to respond to the whole question. It looks like we have, Will,
I'll go.
I want to say in the minority on this, but I'm looking at Jackie Robinson Ivy. I don't want to get in trouble. So you're they're up against you. Why don't you go first, and then we'll have everybody else standing with Father Pfleger, and then Dr. Bell, and then we'll come back to John. So your response, Will, to all this that's just been said.
One thing that I wanted to add is that there are people who live in communities like Auburn Gresham and Inglewood and Kenwood and North Kenwood, Oakland and Lawndale who view their communities as what we just called them. They don't see the places where they mow their lawns, where they take their kids to school, where they work hard, where they're part of the block club, where they go to the CAPS meeting, where they go to their church, where they are involved in trying to create a community out of chaos. They don't call where they live Chiraq. They haven't allowed the gangbangers to take control of their neighborhoods and to label it as that. And they work every day to make their neighborhoods just as good as any other neighborhood in the city of Chicago. And those people are not in this room today. A lot of them aren't. But they come up to me and they tell me, Alderman, I appreciate you standing up for us because I don't want my neighborhood to be known as Chiraq. This is where I bought my home. This is where I decided to put down my roots. This is where I believe we can make the world a better place. And I refuse to allow these people to call where I live that name. And I think that's an important thing to bring up. There's a lot of hope in these communities. And I don't know what this movie is going to be about, but I think it's important that in all the things that are said about these communities and all this discussion, that we remember that there are people fighting hard every day to make these communities better. And we need to do what we can as a city and as civic leaders to give them the tools to make their communities better. And I think that naming this movie Chiraq does not help us in that endeavor.
Okay. Father Pfleger?
Yeah, just so I'm one of those people that live in those communities and work hard and lived in the same spot for 40 years. So, and the folks that Spike talked to when he first came in January, so that everybody knows, when he first came to talk with people, I had to meet with two high school principals, one from Englewood and one from Pfleger, high school out in the south end of the city. Over 60 brothers from the street, over 50 parents who have lost children to gun violence, and 2 reporters who covered the violence for the city of Chicago. And he ran that name by all of them, and all of them said, that's the reality in which we live. We talk about it hurting a city. 2013, France Tourism Bureau said that anybody going to Chicago should stay away from the west side or the south side past 59th Street to avoid at all costs. When did we react to that? When do we react to the IIT student that gave up an entire tuition because he said he was afraid of getting killed in Chicago and ended up going to another state to go to school without a full tuition grant? We're not talking about the good people in Chicago or Philly or South Central or Brooklyn, New York. What we're talking about is a reality. In this country, we have a violence, and we got to stop being in denial. It's real. People are dying. And while we're here discussing this intellectually, the 55 people and the 10 people that got killed, their families are preparing funerals and at hospitals watching someone hoping to get off of life support. That's real. And that's what we've got to deal with. We got to stop denying it. Let's face it. Nobody said, he says, well, nobody knows what the movie's going to be about. Tell me what director ever came in and said, here's what the whole movie's going to be about before the movie came out. I think we can trust a guy like Spike Lee, who has proven himself as a voice of conscience in this country.
Okay, Dr. Bell.
So here's the thing. I don't believe what I see on television, hear on the radio, or read in the newspaper, because it is most of the times flat out wrong. I am a scientist. I don't go on those things that I read or see because they're sensationalized. The problem is that the general public bases their public health on the garbage that's in the media and not on scientific facts. And that's a big mistake. So just And you got to understand, I started being interested in the issue of violence in 1976 when I was treating a 4-year-old girl who had seen her mother stabbed to death. The vast majority of violence occurs between two people who know one another. It is not gang-related. The gang-related violence has had a relative increase because the domestic homicides have decreased because we had enough sense to start building domestic violence shelters. But just so people are clear, all of the science that I've read, not the media, tells me that homicides in the United States are down 50%. Now that's just, for me, a fact. I'm sorry, but that's how it works. Now the issue is, how did we accomplish that decrease? Because I've been doing this since 1980, trying to figure out how to fix the violence, because I'm the guy that's taken care of the people after they've survived the shooting who have post-traumatic stress disorder. So I don't want to be on that end of it. Little quick thing that you may not realize. There was a Chicago fire, whole city burned down. At one point right after that, 75% of Chicago was immigrant, Irish, Italian, and German. The homicide rates, the domestic violence rates, the juvenile delinquency rates were sky high. Jane Addams, Nobel Prize winning social worker, came in, looked at it, and said, the problem is that the people in the city of Chicago don't know each other. They don't know one another. There's no social fabric. There's no glue. There's no people watching everybody's little teenage terrorist who's running out of control. And that's why we have these problems. And that's what we've got in Chicago. We've got a bunch of neighborhoods where people are afraid of everybody, afraid to look after one another's kid, and it's the exact same thing. So one of the proven, not media, movie, I'm not interested. One of the proven solutions is to create social fabric. Teenagers, young people, are like automobiles. They're all gasoline, no brakes, and no steering wheel. And it's up for adults to be the brakes and the steering wheel. But in order to do that, you've got to create social fabric. And that's what we're missing. But that's a hard, solid solution.
Thank you, Doctor. John, you're up. Before you go, John, I would assume, Carl, that that's not the first time you came up with that analogy about the gas and the...
It was in the Journal of the American Medical Association.
All right.
They didn't want to publish it because it wasn't scientific enough. But it's based on hard brain psychoneurology.
That line will... I'll use it and make if I said it. Okay, go ahead, John.
Echoing in part what Dr. Bell has said, that there is clear evidence that the number of homicides has gone down nationwide. But some argue or wonder whether that is because some of the shooters can't shoot straight. And the other part of that is that modern medicine has gotten better at saving folks who have been shot.
That's right.
This week, DNA Info reported that from New Year's Day 2010 to this past Monday, there have been more than 12,000 shootings in Chicago, or about 6 shooting incidents a day, and that more than 14,000 people were hit by gunfire in those shootings, with more than 2,000 who had died. Some say that Chicago is a murder capital is a misnomer when you consider crime per capita in other cities. But what's happening in Chicago is in some ways a microcosm of what's happening around the country. In fact, the murder of African Americans by African Americans amounts to what I consider to be genocide, at the very least fratricide, an alarming toll. In Chicago alone, from 1991 to 2008, there were 12,278 murders. About 77%, or 9,408 of them, African Americans, according to Chicago police figures. But the numbers are even worse. Across America, from 1976 to 2010, a 34-year period, the number of murdered black males 14 and older, 243,996. The number of murdered black females, 51,897. The number of black males and females murdered, 295,893, most of them killed by people who look like them. So we got to deal with this issue, and when people say Black Lives Matter, we have to embrace that in our own communities as African Americans. But those numbers I gave you, to give you a visual of what that looks like, because Sometimes I think the gravity can be lost on the numbers. But that 295,893, I want for you to imagine the United Center, Wrigley Field, U.S. Cellular Field, and Soldier Field, nearly all filled simultaneously with black boys, girls, men, and women. Now imagine that twice over. Now imagine them all dead.
Okay, well. Where are our people? Raise your hand if you have a question for either of our panelists. We have some are very long and some are very short, and which probably covers all of them. Okay, this is anonymous, so we normally don't give that, but no one's talked about this, so we might as well get it right off the table. Why should the state of Illinois invest in films that have negative impact on economic development and that stigmatizes communities? As you know, the state of Illinois is a big contributor to all the...
Why should the state of Illinois allow a plethora of liquor stores be in poor black communities so
Right.
that women who don't know they're
Exactly.
pregnant drink?
For the record, I'm just reading these, okay?
I know.
And why should the state of Illinois be pulling millions and millions of dollars of violence prevention and jobs in the South and the West Sides of Chicago right now that's going on under this governor? And the whole purpose of the film office of the state of Illinois is to bring films in, to bring jobs, to bring investment in the state of Illinois. I didn't see anybody having a problem with Empire that exploits all kinds of people, and nobody's talking about that. We had another movie not made in Illinois, but a movie called The Interview, which could have kicked off a war. But nobody talked about tax dollars to interview about the assassination of the leader of North Korea.
Okay, we have no more questions. We have enough questions to go on to a long time. Sure, Jackie.
What am I?
Have I ever said no to you? Now no. I mean, it's going to last as long. All right, here we go. So we'll make them snappy comments, and I'll try my best to even them out. Is that Aquila Davis? Aquila, I'm sorry. This goes to Father Pfleger and Dr. Bell. You got 90 seconds. I'm going to be a taskmaster. Well, we'll see. How can we help the people who are killing each other and innocent victims to understand that when they kill other people, they kill themselves? No government, social, nonprofit, or private programs or donations will solve the problem of violence if life is not valued by those who are doing the killing. It's a good question. Go ahead, Father.
Let me just say that I think the value of life comes from being able to have a job, being able to have an education, being able to have an opportunity, being able to have a place to live. So all those give value of life. It is, the answer to violence is comprehensive. It's jobs, it's education, it's opportunity, it's parenting, it's mentoring, it's churches, it's neighborhoods, it's businesses, it's everybody doing their part. But when you tell people to value their lives, and society tells you every day your life is not valuable because your neighborhood looks like a third world country, and there's no jobs, and there's no business except liquor stores, as Carl Bell said, how do I value me if everything around me tells me every day that I have no value?
Sure, Will, go ahead.
So, Father Mike is correct. Behavior is multi-determined. It's biology, it's psychology, it's social, it's cultural. But I'm telling you, as clearly as I possibly can, if you do not have a functioning brain, and if I ask you what 100 minus 7 is, and you think about it for about 90 seconds, and you tell me the answer is 84, and you graduated from a Chicago public school, something's wrong with your brain, and you respond to little small insults with enormous rage and violence. I can't begin to impress upon you the 4 out of 10 people who've been misdiagnosed with pediatric bipolar disorder and mood disorders because they don't know that a mood is a persistent, enduring, long-term emotional state, while an emotion is something that comes and goes. And so I'm telling you, there are a ton of very subtly brain-damaged folks walking around from being in all these social determinants of health, plethora of liquor stores. And that's a root cause of the problem. They're not going to understand even the substance of the question. Don't understand morality, don't understand values. It's just not there. And so it hurts me to have to say these things because all my career I've been hearing that black people are dumb and they're mentally retarded and they're bestial and they're all these things. And I just would not accept it because I don't think it's right. But I can tell you that if your brain is subtly damaged, you have those characteristics. But again, it's fixable.
Alderman?
I just want to say that, it's a lot easier for aldermen to get media coverage for engaging in corrupt and venal activities than for doing our jobs. When we bring development to our communities, you don't see the news cameras. When you have new streets paved, new parks open, new investments made by the city to make our neighborhoods better, you don't see the same kind of attention. And many of us are committed to changing the very fabric of what our communities look like so that people have hope, so they have jobs, so they have a reason to stay in these neighborhoods. We lost 200,000 African Americans in the city of Chicago between the years 2001 and 2011. And there are a lot of reasons why, but the violence is part of it, and part of it is the sense that those communities weren't getting the same amenities and benefits that other communities had. And if we want to keep people living in these communities and we want to make these communities better, we have to improve them. And I think a lot of my colleagues are doing that work. We just don't get the attention and the credit for it that we should.
Okay, the moderator is going to ask a question. Thank you very much. For the record, I also was born in North Lawndale. And for the record, I lived there for 10 years and went to a school that should have been closed long before it was finally closed, Lawson Elementary. Anyone remember Lawson Elementary? Believe me, nothing was, you haven't missed much. It's gone, that's good. The issue was we were a poor working class community. We had a lot of guys going around beating up people. Some of us became quick runners. But no one got shot.
Yes.
Right.
Guns seems to be the overriding issue, and Father, I know you're on the attack on that, but it just seems to me, not that I'm an expert, but quite obvious that to kill somebody physically is a lot easier with a gun than any other weapon. And yet these guns go out there, and we got terrorists selling guns all over this place, misreading the Second Amendment. So, Father, how do we deal with it other than your lawsuit? Guns. And by the way, that was Carol Sexton and a whole bunch of other people asking about that. Go ahead, Father.
Okay, let me just say about this. I've been fighting this gun issue for years and years and years. I've asked one simple thing to be done that any logical gun owner has no problem with. Let's title guns like cars. If I have a car and I give it to John, I don't transfer a title and he gets in an accident, they're coming for me. Why not do the same thing with guns? Why not put titles so that everybody buying a gun has a title? So the person buying 100 and 200 guns and then selling them on the street, you don't transfer those titles, and your gun's caught in a crime, then they're coming back for you who bought the gun and who's trying to make money out on the street. The NRA, the Capitol, the state legislature stops this because the NRA lobbyists put so much money on the table to say either we'll buy your vote or we'll run somebody against you, and they become afraid. I get that, because as an NRA member told me, if we stop easy access to guns, we stop the faucet, the guns are pouring in. I don't care how many of the police are pulling off the streets. I don't care how many people are turning in at gun turn-ins. As long as the faucet's still open and the water is still running of guns coming out into the streets of Chicago and across this country, here's what happens. You stop that faucet, you stop that access. As the NRA member said, the number one consumer of guns in America right now are criminals. You stop criminals from getting guns, guess what? Less guns sold. Less money for manufacturers, less money for Chuck's Gun Shop. The manufacturers get less money, then guess what? Less money gets paid to the NRA lobby. The reason we won't stop the gun flow, because it's about money. Because money is more important than black lives and brown lives in the Chicago area and around this country.
Now, I'm going to make an announcement. I think Father Pfleger has a kind of his way with words. You think? You've had some experience doing this, huh? All right, another great question and another name that I can't pronounce. Oh, wait a minute, Anna Marie. Right? Anna Marie Slobig? Believe me, this isn't so easy. Illinois School of Professional Psychology, this is for you, Dr. Bell. Argosy University. Dr. Bell, I appreciate your insights about fetal alcohol exposure and the consequent brain damage. But aren't you also seeing the developmental consequences of trauma? These kids are exposed to violent communities. Hold it, almost done. Their parents are subject to racism and intergenerational consequences of the problems in their communities. You could tell it was written by someone who teaches.
So in 1982, I started seeing a bunch of children, and they kept telling me about being exposed to violence. And I went around and started talking about that. Nobody knew what I was talking about then either. And then finally, we now know that children exposed to violence is an issue because there is childhood trauma. As I dug deeper and deeper and deeper, what I realized is that children have protective factors that prevent them from being traumatized. They have social fabric.
That's okay.
Must be all right. They have social fabric. They have connectedness. They have social emotional skills. They have self-esteem. They have adult protective shield. They know how to turn traumatic helplessness into learned helpfulness. So yes, there is childhood trauma. Supposedly I'm a national expert on it, but there is resiliency. So risk factors are not automatically predictive of a bad outcome because of protective factors. I can tell you that the people that I have seen who have the fetal alcohol are the victims because the people who are perpetrators look for people who are intellectually disabled. They're the ones who are victims constantly, being teased, being bullied, all of that. So again, let me be clear. Behavior is multi-determined. There is no one single thing that's going to fix the problem of violence that I've been studying since '76. But there are some things that have more weight than others. And what I'm suggesting, since there is a biotechnical prevention strategy versus a psychosocial prevention strategy. Psychosocial prevention strategies are very difficult to implement. The only one that's been around and is national is Head Start. And that got started by the people who recognized the social cultural mental retardation in '67. Biotechnical preventions, polio shots, screening people for phenylketonuria, choline for fetal alcohol, is very easy to implement. So there's low-hanging fruit in public health, and this is one of them, and I'm suggesting that that one needs to be foundational in our public policy.
All right, well.
Thank you.
Time is short. Anyone else? Time is short. We have a lot of questions, and a lot of them are very similar, and so I apologize if I can't read them all. One of them is, a couple of them have no names on it. You know, cowards die many times before their death. The valiant taste death but once. Put your name on the question, and I'll read it. Right, doctor? Absolutely. All right. We PhDs stick together, at least for now. All right. I have a Marcia, no last name. I have Suzanne Malik McKenna, 3 names, that makes up. And I have a couple of others. And the last question, you all can take 3 minutes like a closing question. Sure. I'll read both of these together, and then you just pick and choose what you like. I know more can be done to solve murders in Illinois. If we had this happening in Naperville, the murderers would be in prison. Kind of interesting point. What do you think can be done to bring more shooters to justice? Like when police are, what can you get to get more shooters to justice? And the next one, what do you think the top activities can, let me rephrase that. What do you think are the top activities that can address the root causes of this violence? More specific than jobs and economic development, specific initiatives that need investment that we can advocate for. How can we help now and going forth? That's a whole slew of things. That's a smorgasbord. John, we'll start with you.
Okay.
You probably don't have that one written out yet, right?
I do.
All right, there you go.
Why did they give you the questions in advance? I didn't put the questions in advance.
Roosevelt University, everybody. Be prepared. Go ahead, John. 3 minutes for each of you.
Well, I think that it is a very complicated issue on one hand, but I think it is very simple to solve in another. And as I have written about this for years, I keep coming back to the question of all the things that we as a society can do collectively. We can put a man on the moon. We can, when man decided that he wanted to fly, he decided to fly. Eventually, we were able to do that. I read the words of President Barack Obama from May 21st, 2009, speaking on national security. In the midst of all the challenges, however, my single most important responsibility as president is to keep the American people safe. It's the first thing that I think about when I wake up in the morning. It's the last thing that I think about when I go to sleep at night. And I don't know that anything is more critical in Chicago, in our great nation, than the safety of our own children. And when a little girl has to think about, knows consciously that if she goes out in some neighborhoods with her jump rope, to jump rope in front of her house, that she is risking her life. That's an issue. I don't like the fact that Chicago has become known as Chiraq. This is the city that I was born in. I love Chicago. But it is a name that grew organically from the things that are happening in our community. And so we have to deal with that. And we can talk about, and Dr. Bell has clearly laid out some solutions, but I think we also need to deal with an effort to rebuild our families, a shift toward responsible fatherhood, and men choosing to be a presence in their children's lives rather than an absence. We need to talk about women making better decisions about the men who they allow to father their children. We need an effort to create not just living wage jobs alone, but to create community. Right. Like in the old days when neighbors looked out for each other and so-called snitching was simply called being a good neighbor. We need an effort to restore hope in part by churches moving beyond the walls and seeking to impact neighborhoods rather than simply draining them. Right. We need a greater effort by law enforcement to restore order by whatever means necessary so that little girls in some neighborhoods can jump rope again. And we need a commitment by politicians to the people they represent more than to politics or political cronyism or to procuring political favor. And finally, as an African American community, we need to embrace this idea that Black lives matter. More young Black men have more to fear from young Black men than they do any white cop. That's the truth.
That is the truth.
Well, John, I'm glad to see you had something ready for that one. That was Roosevelt University. Father, you're up.
First, amen to everything John just said. It's a couple of things. We talk about the negative image that this movie title is bringing to Chicago. And I agree with John. We got to face the image. We got to face the reality. We're tired about negative image. This has been going on. This movie's been in here 2 months. Maybe we should ban the Sun-Times and the Trib and 2, 5, 7, 9, and 32. Because they're telling what's going on in our communities. And we got to face it. We got to deal with it. And we got to address it. And we got to change it. We've got to change communities where teddy bears and balloons are becoming national landmarks on our corners. We've got to change communities where a girl doesn't ask me in 6th grade. When I ask, she said, will you pray for me? And I say, yeah, what do you want me to pray for? I said, what do you want to be when you grow up? She says, alive. No damn sixth grade girl should have to think like that. That's insane. We've got to change communities that we address these problems. You're right. The questioner, the one who asked the question is right. This wouldn't be tolerated in Naperville. No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. So why are we tolerating it as a nation? We didn't even talk nationally about guns or about the killing of our children in Chicago until 20 babies got killed in Connecticut. Let's just tell the truth. When 20 babies got killed in Connecticut, and I marched with a woman on Michigan Avenue who said to me when I said, why now, why now? And she said, I look at those babies and I could see my son and my daughter. And she said, to be honest with you, Father Mike, when I see somebody killed in the south or the west side, I don't identify with that. That's the problem we got to deal with of racism in America. Every week at the end of this week with George Stephanopoulos, they list all the military who've lost their lives. They just give their name and their race. They don't say if they're black, white, rich, poor, gay, straight, what their class is. They don't care. They're simply military. And we've got to start thinking that way about children who are being killed in the south and the west sides in Chicago and urban areas all around this. These are our children. These are America's children. And we should be outraged because they're our children and think of them as American citizens in the same way. And the last thing somebody, what do we do? Jobs. I can't walk to the store without 5 people hitting me saying, Father Mike, give me a job, give me a job. Last summer, we had 1,120 people got jobs from us for a summer internship. And yes, they're temporary, Alderman, but they gave kids something to do during the summer. But this summer, and we turned away over 200. This summer, because of Governor Reiner, we have 320 jobs to offer this summer. So what do I tell those 800 kids that say, I need help. I need something to help my mom. We got to get our lights on. We got to create a place to stay. We need jobs. Yes, we need mentoring. We need family. We need to rebuild the safety net. We have to rebuild parents and parenting. We have to do all that. But I'm with you, John, and with you, Carl. Understand that we are this great country. If we can find Hussein in a hole, we can solve violence in America. It's not whether we can. It's whether we want to solve it or not.
All right. Thank you, Father. Will, Alderman, you got 3 minutes.
Okay. I want to say thank you to the City Club of Chicago for helping us to have this conversation. I think there's really a broader conversation about what are we going to do as a city about many of the problems and ills that we've been dealing with for over 100 years. And I think we have to go back to America's original sin, which is racism. And until we deal with racial segregation in housing patterns, until we deal with the fact that we have a society that distributes opportunity and misery based on the color of your skin, we're never going to really fully address these problems. And what does that mean? Chicago is a racially segregated city. It's a racially segregated and economically segregated city where we concentrate low and moderate income African-American people, even after the CHA plan for transformation, in communities where there are fewer little opportunities. So, and we say, good, let us border them with highways and viaducts and parks, and let that be someone else's problem. I mean, to the question about whether or not this violence would be tolerated in Naperville, Naperville was created, and I'm not picking on Naperville, it's a wonderful downtown. Naperville and places like Naperville were created to ensure that these problems would never occur there, through exclusionary zoning, through aggressive policing that makes sure that people who don't look like the people who are supposed to be in those communities are not there. And that's the truth. And until we talk about regional solutions to affordable housing, making sure that affordable housing is being created where there are living wage jobs, where people who want to get a job don't have to sit on public transportation for 3 hours each direction in order to support their families.
That's right.
And Naperville has to be a part of that conversation. We're picking a lot on Naperville, but, sorry, Naperville. Your name was used in debate. And that's a conversation we have to have. And we have to be honest about where the next phase of CHA housing is going to go. There was a lot of opposition to super vouchers. You know what? Super vouchers was a good idea. Let's give low and moderate income people larger vouchers so they can afford to live in communities that have opportunity. that have public transportation, that have jobs, that have good schools. That's the way over the long term we break up the ghettos. There's not enough you can do to make ghettos better places. You have to end the ghetto as we know it. That means we build more market rate housing in inner city communities, along with affordable housing, and we build affordable housing in communities that don't currently have it. And we're willing to pay the price as a society to mix these communities together. Now, I'll tell you, it's a very difficult work. But if you really want to get to the problem, that's it. Because if you have Bantustans, you're going to have the kind of violence we see in Chicago communities.
Okay, round of applause for Alderman. Carl, you're to close.
Harvard study, every moderate, large-sized city, there are more poor white people in Chicago than there are poor black people in absolute numbers. You will never see a poor white ghetto in Chicago because poor white people have scattered site housing.
That's right.
They have access to good schools, jobs, places to get food. The liquor stores are not rampant. So that's a structural issue. That I like America's original sin. I like that. I'm gonna take that. So that's one structural issue that we have that's causing my issue, the social determinant of health, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. The question raised for me an issue. I'm sorry, you got to unpack violence because there's predatory violence, there's interpersonal altercation violence, there's serial murders, there's mass murders, gang-related violence, drug-related violence. You've got to unpack these forms of violence because the solution for one form does not work for another form. So you've got to be very strategic about how we approach this problem. For me, the biggest problem in the last 45 years is interpersonal altercation. What would cause a husband to kill his wife or his wife to kill him, or two friends that know one another and have been friends for 10, 15 years to go off in a rage and kill one another? That's affect dysregulation. What's the leading cause of that? Brain damage. And I'm telling you, this is a structural problem that can partially be fixed along with all the other things. But if we're not strategic about it, and if we don't stop reading and believing what we see in the media, we're not going to solve this problem. And we're going to continue to have it, and I'm going to continue to be a little bit ticked off about it because it's not necessary. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Round of applause for Dr. Bell.